Herzlich willkommen hier im Saal des Kfz in Marburg. Herzlich willkommen alle, die den Livestream beobachten. And a very warm welcome to Jan Gehl. We are very happy to have you here. Jan Gehl, a famous architect and city developer, former professor and researcher at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts School of Architecture in Copenhagen, but foremost known as an international teacher, lecturer, and especially expert on city development. I will not list up all the prizes he got, all the books he wrote, and all the famous objects he was concerned with, because then the time of this session will be over before I finished. We're very glad to have Jan Gehl here, known as the city planner who brought us back to the human scale. The city planner whose main concern is making cities adjusted to people and not people adjusted to cities. To develop cities in a scale and range that includes social contact, social interaction on the unplanned scale, on the natural scale between people in cities, or just put it very simple, make cities more livable. We're very happy to have you here, as in Marburg we are on our way, not only developing our city further, but also being concentrated on coping with climate change and getting Marburg climate neutral in 2030. So there's a lot to do on rescaling our town. There's a lot to do on developing our city in a climate and humans adjusted way. And we're very glad to have Jan Gehl here tonight. This morning, actually. This morning to talk with interested students of related topics, and this evening for talking to the general public. So everybody who is watching online now is invited to join us tonight once more. Welcome, Jan Gehl. Glad to have you here. And I give over to you, Jürgen. Herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass Sie alle da sind.
Ja, ein herzliches Willkommen auch von mir. Mein Name ist Jürgen Rausch. Ich bin der Leiter der Kommunalen Wohnungsbaugesellschaft und habe die ehrenvolle Aufgabe hier heute, das zu moderieren. Hatte einen spannenden Nachmittag gestern und Abend bereits mit Jan Gehl und ja, es ist hochinteressant und ich denke, Sie werden das auch heute Morgen hier mitbekommen. Zum organisatorischen Ablauf ist es so gedacht, dass wir die Veranstaltung in Englisch durchführen. Ich werde auch gleich wechseln in mein holpriges Englisch. Das ist nicht so gut, dass ich wirklich alles verstehe und sagen kann. Deswegen freue ich mich, Ihnen die Frau Staudt vorstellen zu können, die als Übersetzerin fungiert. Und wenn es Ihnen auch so gehen sollte, dass an der einen oder anderen Stelle Sie sagen, Sie brauchen eine Übersetzung, dann können wir das so machen, dass Sie Ihren Vortrag in Deutsch halten und oder Ihren Beitrag in Deutsch machen und der wird dann ins Englische übersetzt. Oder wenn irgendwas nicht verstanden wird, was Herr Gehl oder andere sagen, dann können wir das jeweils übersetzen. Ich denke, wir sind nicht ein so großer Kreis, dass wir das nicht individuell und auf den Einzelfall bezogen hinbekommen würden. So now I try to continue in English. At first we had the idea to ask you to give us questions, the research assistants, the lecturers, the students of different universities from the region, from Marburg, and we come to this point later. At first we get an input from Jan Gehl. We start with this. You can you can ask questions if you want it after his input, and then we continue with the questions you gave us 2 months ago. Thank you at first, and now Jan Gehl, you have the word.
Thank you. I have some good news for you. The English I can speak, you can understand. It's my second language. I can only speak English rather slowly. I only know 300 words. You can manage. So I hope it will work this way. I thought I would start with a very light morning show, and here we go. The theme which I will address tonight is these livable cities for the 21st century. Where are we now, and what are we aiming for, and what have we done good and bad in the past? And just to give you the framework, because I am bloody old, and I've seen a lot of things and have been living through all these. I knew all these guys personally, almost. But I'm talking about, I'll tell about throughout the day about these two very dominant planning paradigms which we have combated now for 50 years. One was the modernism, the Athens Charter, the CIAM Charter in Athens 1933, with modernism that we should separate everything. And the other big thing which has happened in the last 50 years has been the car invasion, which has completely blown us over. I'll tell much more about this in detail tonight. But the result of the modernism was really that the concern for people which have been throughout history of mankind in the cities, that was gone. Now the city was a machine, it should be rationally done, and people only had now not the spaces which were made for them, but what was left over when the buildings were put there. And that was the end of social life in the public space, almost. And also it was the end of understanding of human scale, because now it was the buildings, and whatever was not buildings was leftover space, and people had to float around in the leftover space. Early on, they were moving about in spaces made specifically for their life. The other big thing about the change in the paradigms has been that instead of 5 km/h cities, of which Marburg is a famous example, we started now to have 60 km/h cities. Instead of small spaces, we have big spaces. Instead of small signs, we have big signs. You can't see any details, so new buildings have no details. You can't see the people, and there are no people there anyway. That is the picture of the universal suburb after the car invasion. But in these developments, we completely forgot about human scale, and all architects and planners have great problems jumping from one scale to the other, and generally there is a big confusion about scale. The next question, I'll raise this question that when all this really started to be rolled out, that was 1960, and that was exactly the year where I graduated as an architect. And what we know about the influence of planning and physical form on people's life was absolutely nothing. The first voice about this was from America, Jane Jacobs. I was trained as an architect in the 50s, and what we learned in the 50s were to hang over models and move around with the objects. Bingo, this is a good city. You always had to be 5 km up to have the really overview of the good city. And when it was an interesting composition, it was a good city. All talk about city at eye level, which was in all generations previously the thing to do, was forgotten. We hang over the models. And I went out of university to do all these wonderful things for mankind. They could really be happy if the better the composition was. And then I married a psychologist. And then we had a lot of psychologists coming in our house and young architects, and we had a very bad time because all the time they said, why are you not interested in people? Why don't you realize that whatever you do influence people's quality of life? Why don't they teach you anything in School of Architecture about people? Why do you think that your professors go out 4 o'clock in the morning to photograph the monuments to be sure there are no people in the foreground? Have you thought about that? We had not thought about that. We knew nothing. And we came to realize that, that the architecture, planning, and also traffic infrastructure was sort of a column, ivory tower by itself, completely separated from the social sciences. They were speaking completely other language. In my case, I had to go back to School of Architecture for 40 more years to find out what they forgot to tell me when I was there first time. And that was when I found out they didn't tell me anything, because at that time nothing was known about that there were any influence. Actually, what we learned at that time was it doesn't matter what you do, because people will adapt. People will be so happy to have a flat or a place to live that they don't bother about other things. They will adapt and they'll be happy as long as the proportions are good and the aesthetics are well. That was what we were told in School of Architecture. And then, of course, it was obvious that there was much more to that. The sociologists and psychologists, they said, what you know about people is this much about the whole thing. So it all ended by my wife going into the Building Research Institute as the first environmental psychologist in Denmark to write about the psychology of housing. And I was invited to School of Architecture to further studies of how people used, especially how used public spaces. And the whole idea, of course, was to make the people visible so that we have a saying that what you count, you care for. And the traffic engineers all the time counted all the cars, and all the politicians cared for all the traffic. And we had no knowledge about the people in the city. So we set out to make people visible and make tools so that we could study life. And in my case, being an architect, I was not trained in any way I was an autodidact in research, but I was an architect, and what we learned in School of Architecture was to observe and make notes and make systematic notes about, we measured things. So I started to measure people and count them, sat on my behind for 50 years or 40 years. And we did a lot of studies, mostly by observation, in all kinds of climates, in all kinds of cultures, and actually throughout the world, from Japan to America, West Coast, from South Africa to Greenland, Arab countries, whatever. I got a lot of information. I'll tell you 2 little examples here. School of Architecture in Copenhagen had moved, unfortunately, from the inner city, where it has a jolly good time, until out into the harbor in an old army area. And the dean called in a good landscape architect and said, can you make some landscaping here? And he made all these good lawns with iron edge, as you should do nowadays. And in the foreground, you can see a corner. And in the background, you could see a low building. That was where you could have coffee. And when the students of architecture came around the corner and saw where they could have coffee, the landscape architect had the idea that they should move in right angles until they got the coffee. But that's not what students do, actually. So the students, of course, went for the coffee, which has disappeared in the meantime. No, on my screen. Yeah. 3 weeks later, the landscape architect was called in to finish his project. And of course, he could have known all the time, because man is a very energy-conscious species. when you can save some energy for yourself, you do it, and we see that all over the place. And of course, architecture students do as persons. Another thing, it's just some example, that is what we call the edge effect. That is, if you study more closely how people behave in public spaces, you find that when they move in the middle of the room. They also, if you meet a friend and talk to them, you have to talk where you met them. You cannot say, we are not standing in a good spot, we go over here and talk. You just have to stop where the friends are in the middle of space. But all the rest who have to stay for a while, they go out to the edge. Because if you want to stay for 15 minutes and wait for somebody, wonder what's happening, but not to worry. No, you don't stand out there and wait for 15 minutes and move your legs a little bit or whatever you do. Because after 10 minutes, people will start to say, what's he standing there for? Is there something suspicious here? What's the phone number for the police? Whatever. So you don't stand there. It's very natural. You drift over to the edge, and the edge is absolutely a much better place for Homo sapiens because all our senses are out here. Here we can control the whole space, and nobody can come from behind and say, hey, and so there's nothing behind you, and you get everything happening you can see. Edge is very, very preferred all over the world by people because of the biology of Homo sapiens. So we all stick to the edge, like in the St. Peter Square and any square. And then we started to think, maybe it is difficult, maybe architects are different from other people. And then, of course, being very careful, we started to study behavior of architecture students, and we found that they, exactly like other people, went over to the edge. And then we started to wonder who put in benches like this in urban spaces. And I could guarantee that places like this would never be used voluntarily. You should be absolutely tired to sit on these contraptions here. And if you do this kind of thing, I recommend you bring in Bronx people, because other people will not sit there. So that was one of the studies. The edge effect is a very important thing. What the most important thing in a city is where the building and the city meet each other, the edge of the public spaces. Also, people, of course, have said many times, but there must be great cultural differences. And having visited all these many places, I've come to the conclusion that there are differences, but basically it's the same general behavior, because it has, with DNA research, found out that we are actually same species all over the world, whether we are black or yellow or white or blue, whatever. So we found that there's very much the same behavior from one end of the world to the other in a number of matters. This is a bench from Washington and another bench from Moscow, and it's precisely the same behavior. Also, if people wait for the bus, it's the same all over the world, including Arabia, except that there are no women in Saudi Arabia waiting for the bus. Then I started to put these things together in books. It was actually, I can see now, because I'm very old, that it was rather pioneering to do this kind of study. And we gathered them together in the first little book, which was called Leben zwischen Häusern. And that actually, to my surprise, because this was my thesis, my PhD, that it started to be picked up across the world, because and then we realized it was not because it was a fantastic book, but there were absolutely nothing else written and studied about that at that time. And this year, this little book has a 50 years jubilee. And as you can see from this illustration, that the more years have passed, the more has it been spread out. And out of 30 versions, 15 of them are actually inside the last 10 years. So this knowledge is really spreading more and more, which I'm very happy about. We are making now a 50 years jubilee version of my wife's book and my book, and comments of why they were written, why they had to be written, and what happened with this knowledge. Then the next book of mine, this one, that was distributed in 7 languages by now in 10 years, which of course is a sign that there still is very little written. There is a mayor in Bogota in Colombia, Enrique Peñalosa. He will say it's a paradox that we as human beings, we know so much about the good habitat for mountain gorillas and for whales and for elephants. And we know so bloody little about good urban habitat for Homo sapiens. We are much more interested in the gorillas than in our own urban habitat. I think he's completely right. I'm very, being so old as I am, I'm very, very proud. Actually, an advantage of being old is you can see the effect of your work if you're lucky, which I think is fantastic. But I'm very, very lucky and happy to realize that all my 6 books are published right away in China, and I know they're distributed widely because I've signed most of them, and that was a very hard work. But what has of course made me a little bit sorry about this is that they have not had time over there to read them. So they built like this, still bad word. But my conclusion is that it's now 15 years since we started to study the effect of building on people's life and people's behavior and people's quality of life. And that by now we actually know how to make fine cities for people. The problem is very much to have it implemented. And also there's been made many errors in these 50 years, which we have to address. But we certainly, about city planning, now we know that we shape the cities, but then the cities very much shape the way we live. And if somebody asks me, what shall you do to make a good city? Go through all the demands from the modernists and do the opposite in each area. Don't scatter people, don't segregate, and make spaces wonderful, open the ground floors. All this is what secures a good city, and they are completely opposite to the rules we've had for 50 years. We also know that the details of the buildings are extremely important. So city planning is important, but also the details. You can still make a nice city plan and ruin everything by putting in absolutely silly houses. This facade signalizes psychologically, we don't want you here, go on, my friend, go home and watch television, while the other facade is welcoming and sort of invite people to stay by the edge and sit down and spend some time. The number 1 public space in the world, I think, is the Campo in Siena. And it's been there as a central space in Siena for 700 years. And over the years, we have made a number of we made a checklist with quality criteria, which is in this book. Actually, in this book, I put everything we ever made together in one book. But we have 12 quality criteria which we can use to check public spaces and the people landscape. One area is about protection against violence, against traffic, against unfortunate climate effect. And the next one is about creating comfort so that you are invited to stand and to sit and to walk and to see and hear and to enjoy or unfold. And the last one is about enjoyment, human scale, that you should be able to enjoy the good parts of the climate. And then as number 12, that it should be pleasant sense experiences, good architecture, good materials, view to the forest, view to the water, birds, all the pleasant sense experiences. But this is only one aspect out of 12. And in many schools of architecture, still they say if it looks all right, it works all right. That's crap. You have to look after the whole board. Then you go back to Siena, and you go in there with this list, and you don't come out with 12 times, yeah. No, because each of them are so carefully done, so you're amazed. Yeah, wow, E-O. And when you come down to the one about good architecture and pleasant, good materials, good details, you say, oh, fantastic. And when all these come together, you have the best place in the world. They're very seldom, but you can find them. If you find a very nice, well-looked, visited space in a city, you can be sure that these 12 criteria are just more or less met. And if you would like to know what is the difference between a place, yeah, up top we have one where I say it's from a Danish new town. Sorry about that. But I would say that out of 12 criteria, they forgot 13. And the only thing people do up there is gallop out of the space as fast they can. They look to either side and then they gallop out. The other one is from the same time, it's a new town in Norway, where they have met all these criteria. And this lower space, with the same number of visitors every day, always have 10 times more people. So the quality you provide in your city and the life in the city is very, very linked together. If you are careful with the quality, you have much more life, also in these days and time. Then I'll skip the next part, which was that it's, yeah, we can actually take it on a little bit. When I've been researching for many, many years, more and more mayors came and say, hey, you can criticize what we're doing, but couldn't you come and tell us what we shall do? And then I was forced to make a company. That I was 63 and I was about to retire, but then I started a company, and that's Gehl Architects. And over the years, I've also retired from that one. But I was there for 16 years, and we worked with cities from one end of the world to the other. And that, of course, has been extremely interesting, that there's so much interest in having good cities for people, or as they said in Moscow, come and humanize Moscow. I'll tell about that tonight, how we humanized Moscow in 3 years. But it's fantastic that this knowledge and this research it's been possible to realize it and see the projects come about. And that's one of the benefits of being old. Then you can go back to Sydney and see they've done it, or to Moscow, they've done it. So this is the last one. That is my life in a short. First, I studied for 40 years and produced 6 or 7 books. And that changed the mindset. Because first you have to change the mindset, then there is a background for changing the cities. People should understand why this is a good way of doing it and what you can accomplish. And then they want to accomplish this. And then you can start to do city projects. Change the mindset. And that's the question. Some of you said that there was this city which was very car-oriented. And again, it's about changing the mindset, showing what could be done, what other cities have done, and then ask each individual would you like to raise your children in a city like this one or in a city like that one? Then it is a very strong medicine that most people can recognize themselves in this game. I'll end by this little story. I was in Vietnam to publish a book in Vietnamese in the Danish embassy, helped me. And there was this lady from the Danish embassy, Mrs. Larn. She's been in Copenhagen for a course with the foreign ministry, and she has just come back and there was I, and she said, oh, you must have a serious baby boom in Copenhagen. And my wife and I, with baby boom in Copenhagen, no, we have a population problem. There will be no Danes 200 years from now. We have no baby boom in Copenhagen. Yes, you have baby boom, I'm quite sure, she would say. Then we realized that we have no baby boom, but we have a city where you can see the children. And then we thought about, while she thought there was a baby boom, was that there was a lot of baby prams all over the city, and we have 1 year of maternity leave, and what do? You drag your baby pram all over the city, and that looks like a baby boom. And all the kindergartens, they are out on the sidewalks, and we have all these bicycles where you can transport the children, and on the ordinary bicycles, there are always 1, 2, or 3 children on a bicycle. In the kindergarten, they teach the children to roll in bicycles, and when the children are 5 years, you can take them all over the city because there is a good bicycle infrastructure. And the lullaby in Copenhagen could look like this one. And also they have made a system of what is called the continued sidewalk principle, that the sidewalks and the bicycle lanes go through, and the Mercedes-Benz will stop at the corners and wait for the pedestrians to pass. And that means that my granddaughter, Laura, she can now walk all the way to school on the sidewalk on her own, 7 years old, because she doesn't have any more to pass any streets. And that is a great freedom for 7-year-old to be able to walk by herself to and from school, instead of being brought there and fetched there. So my conclusion is, if you see a city with many old people out there and many children out there, that's because it's a good city. If it wasn't a good city, they wouldn't be there. And that was what was the problem in Hanoi. There were absolutely no children and no old people anywhere because it was far too noisy, dangerous, complicated, whatever. And so all the kids were away, but in Copenhagen, all the kids are out there because the public spaces are nice.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's very impressive in which sympathetic kind you show and focus what the human needs are and how we have to respect the human needs when we are planning, when we create the circumstances in which we have to live. Thank you very much. Are there any questions to this you heard in the lecture?
Marburg is planning to plan some new parts of the city. Who is continuing your work? Whom could we get helping us?
Maybe without a mask I could hear better, or you tell me.
He asks if you could help us planning areas or help us in the urban planning of Marburg.
I have given Thomas my card yesterday. But I only do not very much anymore. But if there is really a wish to have a very good place for people, I would happily. I always say yes.
Are there other questions?
Or I send somebody who can do it.
I will try in English. We are from the University of Kassel and we are students of urban planning. So we get to know these principles of livable city and the human scale. But how do we implement it or teach it to the public to put their personal preferences or put them in the background to make to bring back the social life to the public space without the financial gains in mind?
Yeah, I think it's very much about changing the mindset. You can never ask for something you have not seen, and if somebody comes with an idea which is completely different from the lifestyle you have, and you think he's crazy because the lifestyle I have is given by God, more or less. I worked in New York with our city traffic engineer from Copenhagen. He was just retired, and when we were asked to advise New York, I just hired him and we went to New York. And he told me something which is very important. He said that every city has an arbitrary level of traffic depending on how many streets they gave the cars. And he said if New York had 2 extra avenues, it will have 20% more traffic, and it will have a service level based on this, and everybody would think this is given by God, and you cannot touch it. But if New York has had 2 avenues fewer, it will have 20% less traffic, but it will again have a service level which everybody was happy about, and that was also given by God and could not be touched. An important example is the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco, which was destroyed by an earthquake, and that was a lifeline to city center of San Francisco. Everybody said, oh, now San Francisco will die because Embarcadero has fallen down. And then they set an express committee to reconstruct Embarcadero. And after 4 months, they called off the committee and say, you don't have to work on this because San Francisco is fine and no Embarcadero, because in just 4 months, they found another level of service which were able to service the city. Many people had to change their habits and maybe go 2 in a car instead of 1, and use the public transportation more. So there was suddenly, by act of God, there was a forced change of mindset. And now San Francisco has no freeway. They have a nice boulevard along the bay with trams and people promenading. And they got so happy about this that they took other freeways away in San Francisco, though God has not ruined them. But they say, maybe we don't need this one. Maybe we don't need this one. As we in New York was able to take Broadway away because we said, do you really need Broadway for the traffic? Yeah. Then it was calculated that everything would be better without Broadway. So we took Broadway on.
He wants to continue?
Yeah, to continue this, sorry if I interrupt someone. To stay in the metaphor, should the city planner then play God and take away some people's wishes, or should the public decide, like in commoning processes, is the public space a common good, or should the city planner play God and do what is the best for others?
Good question. Of course, I have been forced or met with that situation hundreds of times. And it's so lucky now that we have so many examples of cities who are doing interesting things in this area or in that area or in that area. And I think it's our responsibility to show at public meetings and show this is what you can do, this is what you can do, this is what you can do. This is what we are doing, but we could as well do something like this. Would you like this to happen in your city? And we have seen one time after the other that the moment people are informed that there are other solutions than Los Angeles for their city, they will start to say, that's interesting. Yeah. So change the mindset and change the city afterwards. Don't change the city first and have the people revolting in the streets and whatever, but show that other cities have done reasonable things, and then they can at once see that that could happen here. It could be my child walking there. That's my experience.
Thank you. There's another question.
What I read with big interest is the word invasion of cars. What we have is a war against human being on the one side. On the other side, it's our progress. It's our future. The cars, the production of cars. But if we remember 1932, we have 3 cars in our city, in our beauty old city, per 1,000 people. Now, 580. So, what are the next steps to go forward by go back? To reach again our public spaces for public people and public life?
Yeah. How many hours do we have? No, it's of course a completely central question. That's about the mobility now and the mobility in the future. What kind of scenarios could we imagine for the future? And in my opinion, we have spent far too much energy on mobility in the past 50 years. We've been completely obsessed with mobility and forgot that the world and the quality of life is not about going from A to B, but how good is A and how good is B. And then we will have to find some ways of going there. I've been to many discussions where we discussed transportation. And then suddenly one say, why don't we forget about transportation? Let's discuss what is a good city, how can we have a good city to live in for people? And then suddenly there was a very good discussion about what qualities we would like from the city, and not whether the bicycles were breaking the rules and the pedestrians were afraid of the bicycles and everybody was afraid of the cars. All this stuff which we normally discuss. But let us think about the climate challenge, because to me, there is 2 challenges. One is there will be no room in this world for the idea that everybody should have 1 ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels. As a general rule, there's no room at all. There will be no cities left, no quality left. Also, it's of course completely silly to put so many resources into one person's mobility. And furthermore, this ton of steel, it is very, it's resting for 95% of its life. It takes up some space in the city, just sitting there, waiting to be rolled somewhere. So it is not, it was in 1905 in the Wild West in Detroit, it was a great idea. But in 120 years later, in our dense cities and with many old people, whatever, it's not a good idea. The more people there are in a city, the more obvious it's not a smart idea to give every man a ton of steel. But we have to tell them, of course, and we have to find a way to get forward. We have to develop the public transportation to a much higher quality. Of course, we have, of course, to where we can to have other means of movement, like the bicycles or electric bicycles. And we have to use shared cars much more. It's completely silly that we still give parking spaces to the individual flats, because in modern cities it should be you have 10 parking spaces for shared cars for 100 families, and then you will have to find out a way so that we can have the vehicles used more efficiently. There are so many challenges, but if we are serious about the climate and that we shall change our ways and live in a greener way, we'll have to look into the mobility very seriously. And that will, in my opinion, be less work for Porsche and Volkswagen, unless they start to do public transportation, electrical buses and whatever. Then electrical bicycles maybe even. Then I can see that. But we have a very, especially in Germany where you have all this car industry, but the car industry, they are scared stiff because they know that the days of the gasoline engine is over and that it will have to change. And they hope that now everybody will buy an electric car. I hope we'll stop that. But that is because that's again waste of resources to build all these electric cars for all these, and we have no room for them. And they will ruin the city planning, all these chunks of steel. So we will have to move less in cars and share much more and do much more public transportation and use our own muscles much more, because we have this other problem now that for 50 years we made city planning inviting people to sit morning, day, evening, throughout the life. You can just sit there, and then you have a new health problem. And that's why the doctors say, make sure that you invite people to walk or bicycle 1 hour a day throughout the life. Then they'll have a much more better quality of life in the old days. So we have, from the climate and from the doctors, very strong indications that we shall not drive too much. We shall do other things also. But it's a complicated arithmetic too, and we have to explain people this. And some cities do that rather efficiently. We can be inspired by them. I'll tell tonight about Sydney and about Copenhagen and about Moscow. Moscow was very easy because there was no great discussion, because they have very, very efficient democracy. So when the mayor thought he should humanize Moscow, then he said, do this. And they did. Yeah.
This is dangerous.
That's another possibility.
But I think a clear answer to your question, a very clear answer.
Okay, what we need are steps in our city to go forward and away from this imagination. Cars could exist beside the pedestrians and the bikers at all. It's a privilege, and indeed, since 30 years over, in the perspective of public, to reach public space again in our city.
Ich möchte nochmal technisch darauf hinweisen, alle bitte in Mikrofone zu sprechen, denn die Menschen, die eventuell im Livestream zuhören, haben jetzt kein Wort von dem gehört, was Sie gesagt haben. Dankeschön.
Ja, vielleicht wiederholen Sie es nochmal ganz kurz zusammengefasst. Oh, repeat it, please, yes. In a few minutes.
My question was, what are the next steps in our city, here in Marburg, to reduce the part of traffic and this mess of cars?
Yeah. Marburg is one case, but I'd rather take a more general case. In Copenhagen, we have city council have passed a strategy. We will be the best city in the world for people. And they've set down, in 5 years we shall be here, in 10 years we shall be here, in 20 years we shall be here. They've also set down a policy, we shall be the best in the world for bicycles. 5 years from now, it should be this, 10 years from now. That's to have a vision, where are we heading, and to have strategies which sets out the goal at intermediate times, so you have a measure stick and can see if you actually are on the track. I think it would be most obvious to have a vision about mobility, of course, and then have some goals that we shall have reduced so many % of all the cars should be electric by that time, and so many should be shared cars, and so many parking spaces could be gone by that time, so that there is a vision of how to get from where we are to a situation where it's much more healthy and much more green.
It's a process you suggest, to walk along a process.
Yeah, have strategies and visions.
Yeah,
or policies, we can call them.
Thank you. There's another question.
Ich darf mal in Deutsch fragen und Sie übersetzen dann vielleicht. Also ich bin hier wohne in einem Außenstadtteil von Marburg und mich interessiert eigentlich die Verbindung der Stadt, die ein Oberzentrum hier ist, und dem ländlichen Raum drumherum. Haben Sie eigentlich Erfahrungen, wie man dort sozusagen das Verkehrsproblem gut anpacken kann, weil wir haben natürlich die Situation, dass viele Menschen aus dem ländlichen Raum in diese Stadt kommen zum Arbeiten oder zum Einkaufen. Sie sind darauf angewiesen, zum Teil eben auch mit dem Auto zu fahren, wegen längerer Strecken, wegen der bergigen Struktur und auch des öffentlichen Nahverkehrs, der bisher eigentlich keine richtige Alternative darstellt. Mir ist klar, natürlich muss der öffentliche Nahverkehr ausgebaut werden, aber haben Sie vielleicht ähnliche Erfahrungen? Weil Kopenhagen ist ja eigentlich eine Nummer größer als wir. Und ja.
Okay, so mainly his question was, he doesn't live in the city center, but a bit outside. And in order to take into account that not everyone maybe has a car outside and people are depending on public transportation, do you have a similar things, for example, in Copenhagen, because it's a bit bigger than Marburg? Have you any experiences in that, how to handle this if not everyone should be depending on his own car, his massive steel, or the public transportation, because it doesn't always present a good alternative here in Marburg, for example? Do you have any experience in that field, how to combine or how to connect the city center to the rural areas?
I think there's no item in city planning which is more looked after than this kind of questions. And there are so many different solutions. I would normally say that every city planning problem has been solved greatly one place. But then the problem really is to find out where is the best solution found in this area and here and there. If we put all the good solutions together, we'll have fantastic cities. But one city's done this, the other city's done that. Copenhagen is not particularly good in that area, which you mentioned here. Other cities have developed better systems of park and ride and things. The matter is that because it's basically has been the market who have made the city planning, then we have all kinds of, the car has had a very dominant position because of the way it's developed without really planning, but that the production of cars have decided how we should build. There are solutions, and we will have to think about a transition period of 15, 20 years where gradually we start to live in another way. I also think that we will have to realize that maybe we will spend more time in transit and we'll have more efficient working time and have more time to other things. And maybe it could be pleasant.
Is it necessary to translate it? Or it was clear. I want to say we made yesterday a tour, and we also have been in Bauerbach because we wanted to show Mr. Gehl that we are in an area or in a region with less density outside of Marburg, and that's the question, I think. How can we go to move people, go by bicycle from such a village outside from Marburg, 10 kilometers away from the center town? But are there other questions? Please.
I'm not very used to speak English in my daily life, so I wrote down some questions. I'm a student of the University of... Sorry?
Yeah, keep the microphone close.
I'm a student of the University of Marburg, and I've learned a lot about mobility in the last month because of its role in climate change and our daily life, health and livability. And yeah, I do have 3 questions and a little introduction why I'm asking it. So in the last month and weeks, I came in contact with people who seem to believe...
Could you speak a little bit slower?
Yes, I can. I came in contact with people who seem to believe that there must be a change in mobility sector in terms of climate change and livability. But at the same time, whenever it gets more concrete, they say, oh no, we need these parking lots, we need these broad lanes for cars, we cannot close this area for cars. What we need is alternatives. Let's make public transport more attractive, give them bike lanes, and they will leave their car in the parking lot in front of their house. They want to use mainly pull measurements rather than push measurements. So here's the first question. Can we achieve a livable city with keeping the same amount of cars or traffic volume done with cars? And if not, how severe does the reduction have to be in your experience? That's the first one.
I have no answer to that one. I think that over time we shall reduce the pressure of the individual mobility in cars from the various city districts by building in other ways and have other means of moving, or maybe moving less by having homework. And just if you had 2 days at home working from your Corona style, from your house, you will have 40% less traffic, ideally, on the roads. So there can be a number of adjustments, but I do think that there is a very serious conflict between the level of car traffic we have in our societies and the wish and the realization that we are a lot of old people now, and we are small households, and we need good cities. We need to walk and bike because the doctor said there's so many contradictions in the way we live today that we have to address it, if nothing else, then for the climate. So it will have to be addressed, but it will have to be gradual. The city traffic planner in Copenhagen, he was there for a long time, 30 years. He was very clever. He said, if they can't park, they don't drive, which is clever. And then he took 3% of the parking out of the city every year, and he said, if you do it slowly and don't tell nobody, nobody will figure it out. They will not be... And then he reduced considerably the number of car parking, and there is very few now in Copenhagen Center, and we have all learned that it's not smart to take the car into the city. Of course, then there are other alternatives in the meantime, which is important.
And reducing... Whoops, is it turned off? No. Reducing the parking lots, it's kind of... It's a push measurement. So do you think we can manage it by just using measurements, by just giving alternatives without taking parking lots or reducing car lanes?
I really think that a change in mobility patterns is that if you make that you have to really to reduce the number of lanes, and you have to reduce the number of parking spaces. At the same time, you step over the time, you get other patterns of life. I've seen it happening with myself. When I was a young man, I actually had a parking lot at the School of Architect in the center of the city. That lasted only 2 years, and that's 50 years ago. And now I never dream about taking a car into the city and find out that they have a very good public transportation system. Also, being retired, I have time to go by public transportation, but I like to go by public transportation and look at people and see the life of the city. There's no coffee in the tram and the metro yet, but good one.
Okay, so we have to use both. We have to use both. We have to take the parking lots and giving good alternatives to achieve livable cities. Is it what you think?
Put it closer to.
Sorry. So, do you think we have to use both, taking parking lots and giving them alternatives to achieve a livable city?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in form, I will tell about tonight in Sydney. They have a very strong plan. We will make Sydney green, and we will make it much more easy to walk and to bicycle. We do it for the climate, and we will make Sydney green. And they don't do much because it's not easy just to start. But whenever they do anything, they are very, very good in making posters. So the whole city is full of green posters. We will be green. We will do more bicycle lanes. We'll do more of this. And that is to tell the people that this is the way we are going, and you voted for it yourself. And so it's not to harm you that we now take the parking away here. We are making a bicycle lane. So they are very good in communication, their visions and their strategies, which were actually also up in the elections. And this particular mayor was re-elected 3-4 times with more and more votes on this. We will make a good city for you all. And she's telling it very clearly, so that you always know this is part of a bigger plan, not about your parking space, but about the world.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your questions, for this push and pull mechanism, and thank you for the answers, Jan Gehl. The idea of this morning is to give the younger generation the possibility to discuss with Jan Gehl, to ask questions, and I'm very happy that we can do this in this room here from the network. There are no questions in the moment. If there are no other questions here in the room now, we could change to look after the questions we prepared and which came from you 2 months ago. Maybe there is somewhere in the network waiting for discussing these questions. And my suggestion is we change now and try to project the slides with the questions, and so we can walk along these questions and discuss what these questions are continuing.
And in the meantime, you think about what you have to ask yourself.
Yes.
Is there a question there?
No.
Maybe to fill the process, you know.
Thank you.
I would like to come back to your presentation where you showed those facades of buildings. And I was wondering what your perception is about the current state of these newly built neighborhoods in cities or even city centers. So if you look like in the last 20 years, we have seen massive redevelopment. And the majority of buildings we created are of the kind that do not invite people right? That do not give space to sit there, you know, to hang out, to just observe life in the city. But is there anything about that that makes you hopeful?
Thank you. That was a good one. I started to present this kind of research 50 years ago with pointing out that life between the buildings were just as important as life inside the buildings, and that we could influence the life between the buildings massively by the way we built the buildings and we made the city plans. And looking back now, I can see that this knowledge has been widely used in all the existing cities where you have citizens, voters, and politicians, because the citizens can right away see, oh, we would rather like this one idea than like more cars and parking here. So one town, one city after the other have rather nice looking after the existing fabric, while in the new fabric, it is the developers, it is the real estate agents, and it is the egoistic, arrogant architects sometimes who do it. And I think that the results generally are very poor where there are no people to keep these other factors to the point. I really think that, yeah, in our office we decided some 8 years ago, I think, we will make a book called Great New Towns of the 21st Century. And we started in 5 continents to get, we asked all the colleagues in Brazil and in Australia, wherever, what are the great new towns in Australia or in South America or in Central America or in America or in wherever. And every day the book got more and more thin. And in the end we decided there were a couple from Germany which were not too bad, and there were a couple from Sweden and one from Finland maybe. But we decided that there were so few great new towns of the 21st century that there weren't enough for a book. There are some examples here and there which I think is very interesting. The one I like the most is in Malmö, Sweden, and that is made exactly, of course, based on and that is made of it is the Swedish-English architect Ralph Erskine, who throughout his life has never had the problem not looking after people. He always looked after people also, made great architecture and looked carefully after people in the same process. And they still do that in that part of that little group of people in Sweden who have that training. And they did this in Malmö, called BO01. It's 20 years old, and it's got all the qualities you can mention.
Yeah, very.
But there are very few, but it is possible. I've tried it a couple of times, almost succeeded.
Thank you. Very interesting. I should read about it. I've never known this, what you said.
Ralph Erskine is a very good place to start.
Okay. When there are no questions in the room now, we change to the questions we get and you can read on the screen. There's a question: the human scale in conceptual projects is basically understandable for urban planning, but how can less structural changes still have the same impact? And we added to this question in relation to Marburg. Also in Marburg, various developments of the post-war decades, which correspond to the model of the car-friendly city and the Athens Charta, separation of functions, have created structures that do not correspond to the modern target concept of urbanity and the principle of human scale. Examples include the city highway in the Lahnberger campus, we have seen yesterday, with the clinic or hospital and the natural science institutes far outside the city. What possibilities do you see for adapting such structures with reasonable effort?
That is a task which they work with all over the world now, because these structures from the 60s, 70s, 80s, they are now 30, 40, 50 years old, and has to be addressed. And what they do, say in Denmark, we have a number of Plattenbau of the modernistic type, which could have been in East, in DDR, or anywhere. They have them all over the world. But what they're doing in Denmark is very much, they take down some of the blocks, and then they build row houses in between to introduce the small scale, but also to introduce other types of people, other income groups. And also these other places were normally so that they were not connected really to the surrounding, and they found that is a problem. So they take streets through the areas now to link them with the surrounding, so that instead of homogeneous blocks of 4 or 5 story, whatever they were, then they now have row houses and 3-story houses put in between in the lawns, which were never used, but were good for tuberculosis. But we don't have that as a major problem today. But we have that there's far too much space, and it's too dull, and there are too few services. So it's also a matter of having more density and more services in these areas. That is done universally. And I know of, talking about the university here, I know of Curtin University in Perth in West Australia. They have decided to turn their university into a city by giving up all the land between the departments to housing and to services, and trying to incorporate 10,000 people in the university area or something like that, with all the services that goes with people, and actually skip the university concept and say now it's the Curtin city we are talking about, to have a much better time for the professors, for the students, and also have an interesting environment for the people who come to live there. That is exactly a situation like this one. They placed this silly university too far from the city because there was space for expansion. And now they have this lying out there as a moon base. And then they wanted to make it into a city. So that is generally the way these areas are treated, make them into a city instead of a collection of buildings.
Yes, but it depends also how many people can go in such an area. The area we have seen on the Lahnberger campus, it's a very big area, I think, and it's not enough to put 2,000 inhabitants in such an area. You cannot reach urban circumstances then, I think.
Yeah, I have not studied that case especially, but I say that's what they do there. That's what they do here.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure if the one who asked the first question is here in the room or in the network. Is this okay for the asker? We heard? Yes. There's another question in the
Would I ask a question in the other area? Are you from Marburg? No, you're not. Are there some people studying up there on the... You are. Is that considered to be very fortunate to study there? Or are the people studying in the city considered to be more fortunate? Or doesn't it matter really whether you study there or there?
You have to take the bus to get up there, or you can drive by bike. the bicycle lane up there is not very good. It's not paved, so you have to be, you have to want it. So I'm doing it. I'm driving up there by bike, but the buses are often very full, and it's you would be fortunate to study down here in Marburg, I think. What do you say?
Yeah, I like the same.
Yeah, you're studying with me.
Yeah, because when I saw it yesterday, I thought, oh, poor students. What do they do when the lecture is cancelled? And what do they do at the lunchtime? Will they all of them have to eat in the canteen, and there are nowhere to go in? If you have suddenly 3 hours between lessons, what do you then do? And that's, of course, the difference of being in an area with services. You can go to the cleaner with your shirt, and you can go to the doctor and the dentist. You can do, in between classes, you can do a number of things easily, but not up there.
You're stuck up there. When we have 3 hours left, you have to be up there, or you can drive down by bus and then up again.
And that it's interesting when you talked about that. You talked about the mobility to get there and to get back, and not about how to be there for 8 hours a day. I think that it is an important question. I would always think that in university, the most valuable time is not when you are in classroom, but between classrooms. When you are in the corridors, or you are in the yard, or when you on the stairs, and when you talk to your fellow students and do things together with the students, then you have formal education, and then you have informal contact. And this informal, I think, is just as important as the formal for bringing up, for developing the soul and the body and whatever. So I always think that we should, that's all this life between buildings. That's really about the informal life in a city. We can analyze the formal life, and that was what the modernists did. They say the city shall be a machine. You shall live there, you shall sleep there, you shall work there, and recreation you do over here. And if you want to play, you go to a playground. This is play here. That is the kind of thinking, and that doesn't take in account that the life of the children is play and time between play, where they just hang around and where they met casually with some of their friends. And they spend that time mostly on the parking lot, or where the grown-ups are, not in the playground if they can help it. So it's so important, this informal life and the formal life. The modernists, they only looked at the formal life. And they made machines for living, machines for studying, machines for hospitals, health, efficient.
Thank you. Bernd? Sorry. It's to this case.
To this case, Lahnberge University. I agree with you. There are no means for leisure on the Lahnberge, and in 1929 we worked together, the city of Marburg with the university, to redevelop the university campus Lahnberge. And one object was to bring leisure to sports in how do you say it?
Say it in German and we translate it.
Also wir wollten zunächst mal der große Mangel, es fehlen Aufenthaltsorte. Die sind vollkommen vermisst worden, und wir wollten ja die Gebäude neu konfigurieren und dann ähnlich wie der Herr Gehl gesagt hat, also die Zwischenräume für den Aufenthalt neu designen, also speziell für Sport Im Augenblick, ich glaube, auf den Lahnbergen ist noch nicht einmal eine Tischtennisplatte, wo man sich aufhören kann, aber halt auch zum Abhängen, und drittens also zum Unterrichten unter freiem Himmel. Unglücklicherweise hat die Universität und das Land Hessen nur Geld bereitgestellt und stellt nur Geld bereit für reine Lehrräume und leider nicht für den Freiraum, der ja, wir haben es gelernt, extrem wichtig ist, also auch für den Aufenthalt. Und das würde auch die Frage relativieren, muss auf den Lahnbergen gewohnt werden, zwingend, um da Leben reinzubringen. Leben kann man auch anders da oben bringen, gerade für die Zwischenzeiten, also für die Studenten, wenn was ausfällt und was nicht vergessen werden darf. Es ist extrem, hat sich sehr gewandelt, also von dem reinen Lehre, ja auch zur Forschung. Es sind ja sehr viele Arbeitsplätze auf den Lahnbergen, die ja auch Zusatzfunktionen benötigen. Also das ist auch Versorgung, Mittagessen, Abendessen und so weiter und so fort, vielleicht sogar Kultur.
We should translate. It's too much then.
Ich versuche mal alles mit reinzunehmen, was Sie gesagt haben. So he said that basically when they try to redesign this campus Lahnberge, yeah, they also try to really take into account the spaces, like you said, between the buildings. So not only to have places where you teach people, where they actually go to school, to university, but also to have places for the free time, for the leisure time, to actually have activities over there. The problem he explained was that our region of Hessen, yeah, the country or the part of the country we're living in, only gave money for actual institutions that teach people, but not for the places they should use for leisure activities, for actually have an infrastructure there to have, like you said, maybe a doctor or a little supermarket, stuff like that. So that was the main problem, but they tried to have a concept also to use the spaces, the areas in between the buildings. And so they were thinking, like he tried to explain, about sports activities, that there's not even a table tennis thing, nothing to play there, nothing to stay there. And what else did you say? Something I missed about, yeah, say it again.
Also den Mangel oder die Nachteile des Standorts auch gewissermaßen relativieren, wenn jetzt zusätzliche Funktionen kämen.
And this would actually, diminish this deficit of this place, because there's a big deficit in actually how do you spend your time between your lessons, and this would actually make this problem a lot smaller if there was actually a good place to stay in between your lectures.
Thank you.
I totally agree. I would like to address the question of campus a little bit, because way before the modernists started to separate functions, there was a tradition for universities to isolate themselves in, and we can take the American campus as an example, which is very much what has influenced the rest of the world. Then came a rich man and he makes a department of law studies, and then came the doctor and then came the guy who donates a library, and then there's the administration, and then to make it all very good, they put grass between these. And if there comes another one, he gets another building, which is called this and that building. And it was part of this concept that it was very secluded area. This was for the academia, where they could go around on the grass and look at each other, maybe. So this separation by function was way before done in campuses than in city planning. And this is kept to this day, that still we very much make them as single questions. I'll tell about one university. Yeah, one university I think is very funny. Several of them are. But in Harvard, I noticed that because of the layout of Harvard, all the lawns were crisscrossed by the shortcuts. So all the lawns were full of trampled passes to this and that, showing where people would like to go. Then one time a year they have the family day. Then they plant new grass all over and forbid people to go the direct way and try to make it look like an English garden for one day, and then next day they trample because people use this. But I know of one university which have done it in another way. I can never understand why universities were not treated as cities. So in Norway, the Technical Museum, they made a main street. And you enter here, and you have all the buses and whatever, and you have, I think you have the restaurant here, and then you have all the departments, all of them facing the main street, and they have the lecture rooms along the main street. And along the main street, you can see what's happening today and what lectures are open, and you also have shops there, because then suddenly you have a concentration of life, and that makes it meaningful to have kiosks and flower shops and whatever, and outlets of coffee and whatever. And then you have a major canteen here and there. And if a department is bigger, grows bigger, it goes this way. But still it has this interface with the street. So this university is a street. But I think that we should actually, all this about secluding the higher education in a cloister type, that is maybe from the way back where it was the church who did the education, and it was monks who were there. But now education is something for the whole life, and it's an important part of your youth, whatever. And I really think that there are some excellent examples where universities are scattered around in a city. It's not so easy to maintain and control, and there's a number of practicalities which makes the university governments, they love these campuses where they can control everything and have people to do the class. But I think that the education is much better if it is included with life. What they do now in the Danish Technisk University, which is exactly this, not that one, it was this old type, all of them were organized around an enormous parking lot here, so they can park and go to their various departments. Now they are putting a lot of housing in there, so that there will be housing for students, housing for visiting professors, housing for Erasmus scholars, and also housing for ordinary people, so that actually there will be more people living there than studying there after a while, which is the way they treat campuses nowadays. It's part of life.
It's successful, this model?
Absolutely. And so studying is not a secluded period of life. It is part of life. It is lifelong education. And there's another general view on education today than there was 100 years ago, when the campus was invented, I think.
Thank you. I'm sorry, because there is a question in the network, and I hope there has been patience, because we ignored it a long time. Monica.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that to the topic of the Lahnberger campus issue. Jan Gehl was also introduced yesterday to a topic concerning this called the cable car and the Seilbahn project here. And there is actually a connected question to that, asking what do you think about a cable car up to the Lahnberger, and about collection points in the surrounding areas. And also connected to the Lahnberger, we got not a question but a remark saying that in 2009 there were suggestions for possibilities for leisure on the Lahnberger, but this was declined because they wanted to leave room between the buildings for the so-called environment line for mobility buses or bikes. So that is a remark that came in here. I'm not sure whether this is what's the background of it, but I just wanted to give this into the discussion from the network. There's another one which is not related to it. We'll come back to that later.
Yesterday we had this wonderful trip around in the surrounding and also up to this part of the city, which is on the top of the mountain over there, Lauenberger. And we were driving on the Panorama Road, which I thought was interesting name, but there was no panorama anymore. So it was actually a rather dull tour, where there's a wonderful landscape where you could look at, but it's been closed. I think that the first thing to do was to make some visual corridors that from time to time you open a window and you can see the city and the surrounding and have a much more interesting tour to the university. That's a minor thing. But the first thing I thought about that it would be very, if I was mayor here, I would try to organize both the hospital and the university also to be a living area for a number of people. I don't know how much it could be, but using this model of fitting in all kinds of dwellings for students, maybe for teachers, for visiting, for ordinary people, and services to go with that, so that it becomes more of a city part than two institutions lying up there. But the other thought I thought about that was, it is part of the city, but it's very invisible that this is part of the city. And it's also quite complicated to get there as a route, though there are buses and L-bikes and whatever. Then I thought it would be great if there was a Seilbahn, and they have developed the Seilbahns rather much as they have developed all other kinds of transportation. And they have Seilbahns in a number of cities now to link various parts. And what I see as the Seilbahn is more the ideological or the psychological, that you can see a rope going from the main square to the main square up there. You can really see this is linked to that, and there's 30 people rushing up there, and there's 30 people rushing down there. It will take 10 minutes maybe, I don't know. But it could be a visual, a psychological, and ideological linking. For God's sake, this part of the city is a valuable part of our whole city, instead of a hidden way to get there mysteriously.
Yes, thank you, Jan. I think there are a lot of individual questions depending on such a plan or such a vision, and yeah. But thank you for your answer. If there are no other questions in the room, we should change the. It's my job. Sorry. One question was, what can be done against the killer argument, it costs too much, it's not profitable? Somebody asked this question. You can say something if you want to this question. It speaks for itself. Jan.
It speaks for itself, yeah. We have at the moment some good drivers. We have the climate issue, the green issue, and we have this health issue. So today we can do something so that man will be more happy in this city. But if you could say at the same time, it will be much better for the climate, it will be much better for the health, and also having been in the crime prevention board in Denmark, if you could say it will be much safer, then you have, then suddenly it's another story than it's just good for man. But actually all this is overlapping. And the interesting thing is that the kind of stuff I work with in cities, they're the cheapest you can do of all of them. Infrastructure for pedestrians and for bicycles are much cheaper than any other infrastructure. And also infrastructure for certain types of public transportation is cheaper than infrastructure for motor cars. They have in many poor countries what is called bus rapid transit that is called metro on rubber wheels. That is actually motor buses, electrical buses maybe, which have a special road through the city. So instead of making tracks for train, they make tracks for bus, which can run with 80 kilometers through the city, because all the time when it comes to a traffic light, it goes green, so it just rushes through. They have that in many, many countries now, including Los Angeles. So it's also used in wealthy cities. I don't know if that can, I don't think it will apply to a city like this one. But there are these important drivers which are actually cheap and makes a better city, which we can take forward. And when we press for a city for our children and our old and everybody, and health and climate, whatever, it all goes together.
There is another question.
Yeah, I understand that it's there are some driving points like climate change or social points, but you can see we had an election this weekend, and you can see that these arguments who should concern all of us are not the main concern of the population because of financial interests. You can see it in, we are from Kassel, not far away from here, and the whole city council and so on are blocking, not the whole, okay, are blocking social projects, environmental projects. They are building, we have a 6-lane crossroads, which is on a federal level in the main part of the city. And they just redid it and said, yeah, it's now bike friendly, and they just lowered the curbs and did the whole pavement new, not even markings on the streets, just lowered the curb. So there aren't even bike lanes, but they say, oh yeah, we are so car friendly now, because they didn't want to take away anything from the cars. And it's clear for most of us who study this field that there's big lobby interests behind it, and you can't change, even if you go vote democratically, you can't change the interests of the city because of the big lobby interests behind it.
I've always been in the other lobby, and I don't know too much about that lobby. I know it's existing everywhere, but I think that looking at all the cities I work with, we've had good progress in the people-friendly lobby to convince them that this is a good way to go in one place after the other. I'll tell a little bit about it tonight in the lecture. So it's a fight, and I know I've been in the game for 50 years. I know that it's a fight all the time. But there are victories, and there are good examples now all over the place of interesting cities who have had good mayors for a period, or good city councils for a period, or strong influence from the green, like in Portland, Oregon, or whatever. There are examples of interesting other policies, and we can use them to throw to the politicians, say that it doesn't have to be like that. It may even be cheaper to do like that.
We come to the next question. Planning Denmark versus Germany. How to convince investors, developers, municipalities to undertake and co-fund longer processes that include Gehl's analysis with observations and counts. Is anybody here behind this question? Do you want to say something?
I think it's quite clear, but I can maybe clarify it, because in my experience, or what I would say about that it's even though we have quite nice examples of how it could look like, or how the processes could go, it's hard to implement the processes especially in the work with municipalities, what I would say, because it's hard to say, yeah, we do this, because it takes, I assume, a longer time to do observations and counts and get a feeling of a place, and then on the basis of this decide how is it going to look like. And yeah, that's my question. Is it only examples of how it could look like in the future that convince decision makers? Yeah.
You are mentioning here investors, developers, and municipalities. I actually have addressed this earlier, that when it comes to the citizens, it's very strong medicine to show examples of what has been done here and here and here, and say, is that really what you want, or would you rather like it like this or like that? And that is a very strong medicine, and it's really worked everywhere, because if people can see there is another possibility than having a 6-lane road here, then most people will say, oh, that could be interesting. On the other hand, the investors and developers, they will generally, in my opinion, they will be several decades behind, because they look at the previous success. We could sell this in 2006, so we built it again the same way. They are generally very conservative, these guys, but also if they are informed, there are informed and there are brilliant developers here and there. I can mention one developer in Norway. They say that we realize that the spaces in this area district is just as important as the buildings, and can we have the spaces to be really wonderful, then people from all over the city will come to this district. Then it will be, our investment would be much better. So, and they actually asked me, what would you like to have in the ground floors? I said, I will not like Mercedes-Benz and Hennes and Mauritz. In long stretches, I would like a small rhythm, and and there should be, of course, flowers and kiosks and cafes and galleries and a nice mixture of things. And they would say that's so important, so we organize it and we make it for free for these to go there, because then our development will be much better. And that is a developer who understands something about what is important. Other developers will say the ground floor, that's for Mercedes-Benz, they can pay the most money. But this guy, he looked more widely and say that the money comes from all the other ones, so we don't have to pick it up in the ground floor. That will ruin the public spaces if it is 3 big enterprises who move in there. So that was clever. There are brilliant developers here and there. We shall also tell the bad developers what the brilliant developers do.
A question? Okay. Then we change to the next question. How can climate change, urban development, and housing needs be thought about and developed together? Not so easy, this question.
We have talked about that all morning, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And more to come this evening.
Yeah. Then the next question, city and mobility for children and young people, or city as a space for the coexistence of generations. What visionary ideas are there in this area? Where is worth looking, and how are children and young people involved in urban planning decisions?
I'll be nasty now. Next week, I go with the number 7 child, because when my grandchildren are 10, they are invited to come with my wife and myself, with grandma and grandpa, to Venice for 5 days. And of course, I've loved Venice for 50 years since I came across it and realized that was the only city of some size in Europe which had not been invaded by motor cars, but it was at one time the biggest city in the world and the richest city in the world, and it was run entirely by walking and by water bus. And the thing with Venice is very interesting also, that the transition from rapid transportation to slow transportation is not by the bedside, but by the city edge. So at the city edge, you get out of the fast thing, the train or the car, and then you start to walk and take water. So it's just a very, it's quite an interesting traffic concept. And the city is very fantastic. And now of course, no, it's beyond what everybody can do anywhere. But Venice has no playgrounds. The city is a playground. Venice is completely safe for children. You can let them out. They don't hurt themselves. And if they fall in the canals, they are picked up again. I went once to the police head in Venice and said, could we have the statistics about drownings of children in the canals? He couldn't understand the question. Why should children drown in the canals? Oh, yes, they fall in all the time. Yes, they do that. But they are picked up because all the canals are lively. There are people walking along the canals. And because the canals are lively and the people are on the... Then everybody would look out of the window. And when they see a child fall into the canal, they know it's Pietro's child, Carlos, who's falling in for the first time this week. So you go down and do Pietro the favor to take out Carlos and send him home. So it's a very funny example of a complete other way of things working, both in security and in children play. And the children love Venice because it's so interesting for a child. You can see all the processes of the world being unfolded for your eyes. So I've seen that my grandchildren, they love it. And when my children loved it when that was early on. But that is not the answer to this. But we can learn from places like that. And I would normally say, I would say tonight also that we have now an increasing challenge of making good people for elderly people, because there were no old people in the past. Now we have many old people, and they are maybe active for 20 years and should have a good life. That's a major challenge for all cities today. But I would say what is good for old people and what is good for people is actually also good for old people, and is actually also good for children. So the more general good for people you can make a city, the more it will spread to all generations. So it's some universal solutions, and Venice is a very good example of a city which is actually good, except when you have some disability, and if you're in a wheelchair, you can't get over the bridges. That's not so good. But apart from that...
Thank you. I'm not sure, is the one who asked the question here in the room or in the network? I think you answered what the questioner or asker, I'm not sure, how do you say this? The questioner asked you. Thank you, Jan. And Venice is a good thing. I've been there with my daughters, and when someday grandchildren arrive, I go again.
If you see a city with many children on the streets, that is a sign of a good city.
Yes. Shared experience, simultaneous presence in shared spaces. I would be interested how public places would look like in the city of the future, namely interior spaces such as theaters and also squares or parks. What kind of public sphere as a discourse as a discourse space and space for the emergence of community does the city need, and how can these spaces be designed so that they are open for use by all and are relevant for togetherness in the city? Not so easy to give an answer.
It's a rather wide question, but actually that question made me think about these informal meetings which takes place, that in a theater, in an opera, it is great to sit and watch the performance, but then there is a break and you move out in the corridors, and in all the operas they used to have great stairs so that people in the break could come down and go up on the stairs and sort of be visible to the other people. And that was the informal meeting place, but linked to opera. But what is happening in the opera used to be just as important as what was happening on the stairs and in the foyer and in the bar of the opera. So in the opera, in the theater, in the cultural house, in the school, in the children's school, in the university, in all these places we have informal spaces and we have formal spaces. And what is happening in the informal spaces is important. And also in the park, I would normally say that we have two types of activity. We have the planned activity and we have the spontaneous activity. The planned activity is, now I go to the doctor and I have a quarter of an hour to go over there. But on the way over there, you meet two friends, and on the way back from there, you see that there's a nice sun come out and there's space on that cafe. And then you talk to these friends, and on the way back, you sit for half an hour in that cafe, which was not planned, but that was spontaneous, and that was enjoying life. So all our life is a mixture of things we plan and things we are spontaneous. We also, in our culture, we have a planned season, that is the winter. That's a calendar. We have a calendar. We go to all kinds of things. The summer, we throw the calendar away and we just live for 4 months and have no appointments, but have full life anyway. And it's two very different ways of living. And that's why we love the summer much more than the winter, because that's the spontaneous. We let these things happen and develop, and the weather, whatever. It is very interesting, this formal, informal, spontaneous and planned, which goes through all our lives. And I think that good cities and good universities, good campuses, whatever, they are really taking care of the informal and the spontaneous as well as on the formal and the planned. It all goes together, and the funny part is the other part, actually, summer activity.
Thank you. Now we have questions and tasks for urban planners. How should planning processes with people be designed? And how can people be involved in the upcoming transformation process? We spoke about these points this morning already. But do you want to say something to these questions?
As you have found, I want to say something to everything. And grab the floor and keep it. But I will say to all of you, never ask people, what do you like? If you go to a city planning discussion with the citizens and ask what would you like for your area, they will say more trees, because that's the only thing they can all have in their mind, and you can only ask for things you know. And I think it's bad planning just to ask the question, what would you like? We have a very serious obligation to educate and inform people of what is available, what are the choices here. You can have more trees, yes, but you can have trees and playgrounds, and you can have water, and you can have, and they've done this and this and this, and show examples from other cities and say what we are facing in this area is whether we should go in that direction or in that direction or in that direction, and we want your opinion about this. Never ask what you like, but also always educate and show what are the options, what are the directions which we can go. Then you have a much more useful and meaningful public discussion.
Yeah, thank you. A question to this point? Yes?
Keine Frage, aber also eine Replik an Sie persönlich und die Stadt. Es gab doch diese Auftaktveranstaltung für die Umstrukturierung der Beltershäuser Allee. Und ich würde sagen, das war genau sozusagen der Fehler an der Veranstaltung, dass man letztendlich alle Leute bat, Vorschläge oder Ideen zu äußern. Besser wäre es gewesen, wirklich an der Stelle städteplanerisch zu sagen, das und das und das geht und das wollen wir machen. Wie können wir es anordnen? Und jetzt könnt ihr noch was dazu sagen. Also ich denke, das ist ein guter Hinweis für die Planung, zum Beispiel der Beltershäuser Allee, aber auch den Vorschlag, den Herr Gehl brachte zu den Lahnbergen. Ich habe solche Ohren gekriegt. Ich habe da oben studiert in den 70er Jahren und ich war vor kurzem in einem Citizen Lab da oben und habe die Situation wieder gesehen oder immer noch. Ja, und ich finde, die Vorschläge, die er macht, sind großartig, auch in Bezug auf Platz für Wohnen in Marburg. Da braucht man keinen Hasenküppel.
Gut, danke. Vielleicht.
So first thing she was mentioning, in general, she said your advice is great. First thing about not asking people about what they want, but to more take into account the people who design it actually and let them say what makes sense. She was talking about an alley in Marburg that was actually planned to be redesigned. And there was an alley in Marburg she was talking about that was planned to be redesigned, or there were projects going on. And there was an event where they actually asked this question. And she said this was exactly the mistake they did, that they asked, what would you like to have? Like, how should it be to the people? And he said that your advice is so comprehensible because she knows these situations also about Lahnberge campus, that she studied there in the 70s, and that she saw the same problem before and nowadays. So that actually your advice you're giving here in this lecture, she thought is really, really helpful. That's what she said. Not a question, just as a remark.
I would like to add something, which I would normally say to my students, that I say, you shall be professional. You shall come to any meeting well dressed up, well prepared for the meeting and the questions. You shall show, you shall look upon yourself as one who is to tell about what the options are and what are good or bad or various options. You should be professional. You should be prepared. Don't you come there and say, what would you like? And then I say, when I go to the dentist, I expect to meet a professional. I don't expect the dentist to say, yeah, we have a few problems here. What would you like? I would like him to say that there is a problem here, and here there's an expensive solution and a cheap solution. And over here, there's no way it has to go out. And I will just listen to him and take his advice and expect him or her to be bloody professional, and don't let serious questions rest with me when it's his specialty to know about these.
This is very important now we speak about, because we are here in the town very engaged in participation. And I think Manuela Klug wants to say something. She's the head of the urban planning department or authority in our town. And she is very engaged in this point. And Manuela.
Genau, Dankeschön. In Deutsch, wenn es okay ist. Also wir legen sehr viel Wert auf eine frühzeitige Beteiligung der BürgerInnen in Marburg. Und das ist auch der Punkt. Sie haben ja jetzt auch den Prozess Bertershäuser Straße angesprochen oder auch Hasenkopf, dass wir frühzeitig ins Gespräch kommen mit den BürgerInnen, um in Erfahrung zu bringen, wie ist die Situation aktuell. Also wir sind in der Bestandsaufnahme und Analyse der aktuellen Situation und möchten natürlich von den dort lebenden BürgerInnen wissen, was ist gut und was läuft nicht so gut, um darauf halt aufbauen zu können, um darauf halt gemeinsam auch Ideen zu entwickeln. Und wir bringen natürlich unsere Fachlichkeit auch ein, um entsprechend dann Möglichkeiten aufzuzeigen, was ist dort möglich, wie kann gebaut werden, um dann aber auch einzelne Bereiche wirklich auch intensiv mit den BürgerInnen weiter zu planen.
So she mentioned that basically they try to combine these 2 points. On the one hand, to give the professional ideas of what is possible here, but on the other hand, to also ask the people living there what is needed. So that was basically the idea she's presenting right now as her function in the urban development as well. And so as she presented it, it seemed quite doable to kind of ask the people first and also then give a feedback on what of this is possible, what can be actually done or not.
Yes. It's okay for you? Thank you. Then we change to the next question. Thank you, Mrs. Klug. To what extent must planners become politically active in order to implement the idea of sustainability and human scale? Is it still the task of the planners to design the city or to act as a mediator or for the different interests in the city? We touched this already, but you can say something to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, as I noticed this question, I love that. Once upon a time in Copenhagen, we had an American ambassador. He was an architect. And I actually happened to know him from United States, where I was in a jury together with this young congressman, which later was Clinton's ambassador in Denmark. And the moment he came, we had contact again, and he was very, very obsessed with the idea that why are the architects sitting in their ivory towers and criticizing the political system all the time? Why don't they come down from the ivory tower and get their hands dirty and go into politics? And then we decided to have a world conference of architects who were in politics. And it was actually very few we could find who were mayors or who were politicians and who were actually participating in the decision-making. They were all criticizing the decision-makers. So the idea, he wrote a book, this guy, called Design Diplomacy, I think it was called, that the designers should also go in on the other side to know more about the decision-making process and take responsibility. And I really think that we shall not be apolitical and just stand in the corridors and yelling at the guys, you have no clothes on, or whatever we yell. But we should also be ready to go into popular movements and demonstrations and take up political positions so that we use our knowledge and our creative education to do some good for the society apart from making smart drawings. So that's an attitude of a number of architects, but not too many. I don't know about the planners. I think they're also generally out on the fringe and let the other ones do the dirty work. We can advise them. But I think they should also be prepared to do the dirty work or the good work.
There's a question.
Yes. I'm an urban planner at the University of Kassel, and I'm also a politician in Kassel for the Green Party, so I try to combine these things and try to get into this hard work. And I'm now since 5 years in the community parliament of Kassel. And what we talked the whole morning about this process and what you said about change the mindset first, I can only say from my experience from the last 5 years that it's a very, very long process. If there is no mayor or main political person who goes in front of this process. And in Kassel, we have the problem. We have a strong Green Party now since the last elections in March, but there are still a lot of barriers to fight against to get this process done. Like Mate said before, Kassel is a tough city, and we are very car friendly, and Volkswagen in front of the city, so there are the mindset in Kassel is very strict. And what I want to ask you is, do you see a chance that the community empowerment is strong enough if the politicians, the majority of the politicians, do not follow the wishes of the citizens?
I think that you are hinting at something very important, that it takes time. It takes time to develop ideas and to spread them and to change the mindset. I have had the very great privilege to be bloody old, so I've seen that the ideas we started to work hard with 50 years ago, and I remember also the first 20, 25 years, everybody thought that I was ruining my career and I was doing something. I was an architect, I should do form and not life. But I said all the time that life and form are two parts of architecture. If there's no life around it, it's a sculpture. But good architecture is the interaction between life and form. It took a long time, and especially a long time for my colleagues to realize it. The people in the cities were much faster to say, hey, yeah, that's we like that one. But it takes time to change the mindset. I've realized that. I'll tell tonight about in Copenhagen how we have, after 50 years, managed to change the mindset so much that nobody questions that this is what we do. And this is what we do. So patience, my friend. Work, hard work. 50 years from now. No, it will. We don't have that time frame now. We have to be quicker now because we have major challenges just around the corner. So we have to push on. But I think it's so valuable that people from our part of the professions also go into politics, so that more informed discussions can take place. I think that's so valuable and so good on you to be there. And I would like to say something else. We made a number of years ago a book about great cities of the world, and cities who have done well for people. And then we didn't do much work in that area before we realized that behind each city, when we scraped a little bit in the surface, there was a face. There was a firebrand, a very visionary mayor, or a visionary head of the city council, or city architect, outstanding city architect. The one in Melbourne, he would say to me, I've had 16 mayors, I've handled them all. And he's made Melbourne the best city in the Southern Hemisphere by handling 16 mayors. So behind each really good city story, there is some visionary and strong person who have actually been able to hold on to the torch and fight for it and get the other ones convinced, and then do Lyon, Barcelona, Melbourne, Sydney, also in New York with Michael Bloomberg. There are, and Peñalosa in Bogota, there are these characters who are willing to take the torch and hold it up and get the guys to come. There are some millions of cities where it just, they put the papers from one heap to the other heap, and then they go down to the dinner. But there are these, and we need these passionate, also insightful, that they actually know what they are talking about, have studied more than the average. So we need these good people in the cities. There's a clear pattern of this. In Copenhagen, when I tell you about it tonight, we have a system that each party there are 5 mayors, 1 Oberbürgermeister, and then there are 4 mayors, and they are divided after how many votes. So there will be a conservative mayor, and then there will be a left-wing socialist mayor. And the socialists, they always have picked the city planning mayor. So we've had socialistic or left-wing city planning mayors for 40 years, almost continuously. And they have pressed on for, let's get the cars out, let's get the public transportation in, let's be good to the people, let's let the bicycle. And they have actually, I think they've been very instrumental in changing Copenhagen in that particular direction, because they saw that was a resort which was meaningful for them with their political inclination. Of course, they cannot do things which is not voted by the assembly, but then they can put forward a strong case and they can make strategies and then they can get going. I think that's another story of visionary people who have an idea, a vision, a strategy for how the city can be better. So, good luck. And have patience.
Yes.
Continue.
Important advices for the young people. We have one question on this slide, and our idea was to go until 1 o'clock, and we are more than 2 hours in this room, and it should be enough because it's a long day today, this evening, this night. Jan makes his lecture.
My voice.
And so I think this one question we should treat, and we have another question from the network. I forgot. And 2 questions, and then it's enough. Can the concept of sustainability be reconciled with that of growth? And what must happen before planning is oriented towards the common good? An important question, but not so easy to answer.
I think it is not really a question. It's a policy which is necessary, that we have to make a much more sustainable planning in the future. We have to make a number of concessions to reach that goal, and we have to maybe accept that the rate of growth may not be as we used to do it in the silly years here and there, but that we will have to look more for quality than for quantity. So it's not a question, it's the policy of the future.
Thank you. And Monica? Sorry, that's a question to this point.
Yeah, that was my question. I hear that you're saying it's not the way of the future to have this new liberal mindset to always do better, do more, but to maybe take a step back and look at that what is best for the people and not for the economy. Is this what I could hear out of it? Or
it is my opinion that in more and more cases there are this change of mind, that senseless growth and and technocratic approaches are not really the order of today. I see with great joy that this kind of change is happening. And there are so many cities in various ways, and we are one of them here, who are very concerned with this particular question: how can we make a more green city, better quality of life, and still have an economy which is working? I don't think we shall aim for having enormous growth in the future. I think we have evidence that silly growth doesn't lead good places, and that the globe cannot take all this growth, but we may survive still.
Monica.
There is one question from the online chat, from the live stream. Due to the growing online commerce, especially during the corona crisis, the inner cities are dying because people don't go to the shops anymore. In future, what should be in the inner cities instead of shops so that people still will want to come to the inner cities?
That is not, yeah, we saw it in the corona time, but that's a movement which has been going on all the time, that there are changes in the pattern of commerce, and a number of old professions are not there no more, and a number of traditional shops are not there no more, and more internet trade and more supermarkets and shopping centers. So there is definitely a serious challenge to the city centers. It's all over the world, and I've met the question, of course, everywhere. And also, I've seen a number of good attempts to do something. As far as I'm concerned, the answer to this challenge, we must have a lively heart in any city, where we can have the Christmas tree, and where we can meet each other, and we can have the celebrations and the daily things going on, the informal and spontaneous, whatever. So we need a heart, we need a center in a city, we need a lively center, and we have the problems that throughout the recent history, it's the commerce who are paid for the center. They paid for the Christmas decorations, they paid for the upkeep of the houses, whatever. And that is challenged now. I see a fantastic energy in the leisure time world, that we have a fantastic array of activities which are not commercial, but which are related to leisure time, to sports, to all kinds of music schools, and there's so many activities in a city, but they are all hidden, and they don't have much economy, but they are certainly there. It's a fantastic source of energy which could be in the city center and could really revitalize the city center, but we have to find a way of financing this so that the houses will be kept, and that when there could be third world organizations, it could be change of clothes, it could be, there's so many things which happens which could be lively, interesting in the city center. And so I see the leisure time as the source of energy which could reinvigorate the city centers, but we'll have to find some formulas to make it happen.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I do not see, and we are on the point.
Also tired.
They are also tired, yes. We got a lot of good advices for the young people, I think. We got a lot of exciting ideas and inputs from you, Jan Gehl. And I think I can represent the atmosphere in the room here and in the network when I say it was a honor for us, and it was a very fine time to be together with you. Thank you very much.
I will just say one thing. If there was one over here, a couple over here. If some of you have some books and they would like me to write that I love you in the books, you can just bring them tonight, and I will happily sign everything.
That's great.
Seeing what it is.
I must take my book also for this evening. Thank you. That's great. Thank you all in the network and here in the room that you have been here. And if anybody wants to come this evening, the mayor said it already, this is possible.
It's not on the list already.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much and have a good time this day.